Israelis and Palestinians have been through at least two other wars and ceasefire agreements. They have not been able to resolve their major demands, equality and freedom for Gazans and a demilitarized Hamas for Israel. Joining me with more is journalist Nabila Ramdani. Nabila, good to see you again. Thank you for your time. What the Prime Minister didn't mention there is that that Hamas didn't agree to demilitarize. And on this question of cross-border tunnels, and we're not sure that all of them, all 60, were destroyed. So what's your reaction to hearing of the ceasefire and the terms?
Well, I think that, an indefinite ceasefire geared towards saving lives must be welcomed. But sadly, the reality is far more complicated. What is really happening is that time has been called on a cataclysmic massacre, really, during which Israel was once again given free rein to kill as many people as it wanted, and that includes some 600 children almost, and beyond the 2,100 plus victims who have been killed, the vast majority of them being innocent civilians, more than 85% of them, in fact. Thousands more were maimed physically and indeed mentally. More than 20,000 homes were destroyed alongside, infrastructure, vital infrastructure and other services. But it has to be said that, the Palestinians have been celebrating. They're trying to put a brave face to all this, and they're trying to show the world that they haven't been defeated in the face of that, immense injustice and cruelty.
Sure.
But in actual terms, the very terms of the ceasefire are not much different from those of 2012, those who put an end to the 2012
You know what, Nabila,
conflict.
I want to get to that in just a second, but what does Hamas get out of this? More than 2,100 Palestinians killed in this recent flare-up. It doesn't get the seaport or the airport that it was holding out for. What does Hamas get? What do the Palestinians get from these efforts at resistance from Hamas?
Well, I think Hamas gets an awful lot out of it politically, but not necessarily in actual concessions, as you quite rightly said. Hamas has proved that it hasn't been crushed by the fourth most powerful army in the world, and it hasn't, the Palestinians haven't been subjugated by the Israeli army. And of course, the people in Gaza have no army themselves. So Hamas has proved that, it is a resistance movement, and it's done its job as far as this is concerned. But in actual concessions, it didn't get much out of it. It got an extension of the fishing areas from 6 to 12 miles into the sea, and some construction material will be allowed into the Gaza Strip under very strict, conditions, and that, the rebuilding of Gaza can take up to 20 years, according to the United Nations.
I want to go back to Israel for just a second here. Prime Minister Netanyahu is under fire, as you know, at home, with major criticism of him from local newspapers and by his own cabinet. One of the opinion writers in Israel wrote, I think we've drawn it up here, the Israelis expected a leader, a statesman who knows what he wants to achieve, someone who makes decisions and engages in a sincere and real dialogue with his public. They received a seasoned spokesperson and very little beyond that. Is Prime Minister Netanyahu in political trouble here?
Well, I think, of course, Netanyahu has tried to put a positive spin on it all, and he claimed both a military and political victory. And, of course, he likes to portray himself as the man who will bring Hamas to its knees. Well, he hasn't, and Hamas, in fact, has not demilitarized. I think, above anything else, it has been quite costly for Israel, not only in financial terms. The conflict cost some $3 billion, but also in terms of human lives, 68 soldiers and 5 civilians. But crucially, I think the major blow came for Israel's image internationally. The sheer barbarism deployed by the Israeli occupation forces, have attracted global outrage. And it has also contributed, it has to be said, to strain relationship between Israel and its traditional allies like the United States.
Sure.
And I think, just as importantly, public opinion around the world has turned against Israel, massively, and we're seeing a lot of movements, determined to turn Israel into an international pariah and starting either continuing boycott movements or starting, similar economic, cultural boycotts, sanctions, and we're seeing foreign investors pulling out as well.
You have any hopes for talks when they resume again in about a month's time?
Well, I think there are very strict conditions under which the talks can resume. But to be perfectly honest with you, I think that the only way forward into this recurrent and perpetual conflict is international justice. And we have seen moves from both Fatah and indeed Hamas, who are more united than ever, it has to be said, after this latest round of violence, move to hold Israel into account for its war crimes. And Hamas is even determined to answer to the International Criminal Court itself. And that's why we've seen, we've heard from President Abbas that some steps are being taken to sign the Rome Statute, to join the countries who have signed to the International Criminal Court. And I think we are seeing a very pragmatic Hamas now combining military resistance, which is a right under international law, but also a belief in international justice to effectively get freedom for the Palestinians.
All right, let's see where we go from here. Nabila, good to see you. Nabila Ramdani from London for us.